You're nothing without this company. Where else would you go? Bryce leaned forward across the desk, his platinum watch catching the light as he pushed the severance papers toward me. $22,000 for 6 years of work. The insult stung worse than the number. I'd stayed until 3 a.m. for 3 consecutive weeks to save their third quarter finances. I'd rebuilt their entire supply chain management system that reduced waste by nearly half. I'd turned their struggling regional office into their most profitable branch. And now I sat here, being discarded by a man who'd never earned anything in his life. You should be grateful, Bryce continued, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. Dad wanted to let you go without a package. I convinced him you deserved something. He smirked as he slid a Mont Blanc pen across the polished table. The pen his father had given me when I saved the company $10 million last year. We'll need your building access card and laptop before you leave, he added, checking his watch. Security will escort you out. My fingers trembled slightly as I took the pen, not from fear or anger, from anticipation. I appreciate the opportunity, I said quietly, signing my name on the line. Bryce didn't notice I'd been making calls for the past 3 weeks. He didn't know what was coming. He wouldn't understand until it was far too late. Before I continue with what happened next, I should introduce myself. If you've ever felt undervalued or pushed aside despite your hard work, you might recognize yourself in this story. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of corporate justice. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. My name is Aria Bennett. I was the head of operations at one of the largest supply chain management firms in the Northeast. Not the most glamorous title, but I was the person who made sure everything worked, the invisible engine keeping the company running, while others took the spotlight. I joined fresh out of business school with a radical approach to vendor management that nobody wanted to try. Nobody except Robert, the CEO, who recognized talent when he saw it. He gave me a chance when his board said no. Within 18 months, I'd proven them all wrong and earned my place in the executive meetings. That was 6 years ago, before his son Bryce returned from his extended international business development trip that everyone knew was just partying across Europe on company money. The first sign of trouble appeared during a Tuesday morning staff meeting 4 months before my termination. Everyone, please welcome my son Bryce, who'll be joining our executive team as Deputy Director of Strategic Development, Robert announced. I'd met Bryce before at company functions, typical entitled heir with more confidence than competence. But the position was newly created, and it sounded suspiciously like a major part of my role. Bryce will be working closely with Aria on the Southern Expansion project, Robert continued, not meeting my eyes. The Southern Expansion, my project, the one I'd spent 18 months researching, planning, and building relationships for. The one that would either cement our market dominance or sink us if executed poorly. I have some fresh ideas to bring to the table, Bryce said, flashing a grin around the room. Sometimes we need new blood to shake things up. I kept my expression neutral as colleagues glanced nervously my way. I simply nodded and offered my congratulations. That evening, I stayed late reviewing my employment contract, particularly the non-compete clause everyone signed without thinking. It prohibited me from working for competitors for 18 months after leaving. Standard stuff. But there was more. The clause was bilateral. It also prevented the company from hiring anyone who had worked for competitors in similar roles for that same period. A protective measure to prevent industry talent poaching that nobody paid attention to. I tucked that information away and went back to work. The following weeks became a slow-motion car crash. Bryce attended every meeting I led, interrupting with suggestions that showed his fundamental misunderstanding of our business. He requested updates that required hours of preparation, then barely skimmed the reports. This vendor relationship approach seems outdated, he declared during one meeting. Despite having zero experience with supply chain management, we should be more aggressive in our negotiations. I explained carefully why our current approach maintained quality while keeping costs down. These relationships took years to build. Aggressive tactics might save money short-term, but let's try my approach, he interrupted. Dad wants us thinking bigger. The vendors I'd carefully cultivated for years were suddenly being strong-armed by a novice. 2 dropped us immediately. The quality from others declined while they technically met contract terms. I documented everything, not for a lawsuit or dramatic reveal. I'm not that type. I documented because that's who I am. Thorough, precise, always prepared. The breaking point came during the quarterly investor presentation. I'd prepared a comprehensive deck on the Southern expansion strategy, 64 slides of meticulous research, contingency plans, and projected outcomes. I'd rehearsed for days. The morning of the presentation, Robert called me into his office. "Bryce will be handling the presentation today." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Sir? It'll be good experience for him. He's been working closely with you on this." By working closely, Robert meant Bryce had attended 3 meetings and asked questions that revealed he hadn't read any of the materials. "With all due respect," I said carefully, "this presentation includes complex financial projections that require intimate knowledge of—" "He's been briefed," Robert interrupted, suddenly interested in papers on his desk. "You'll be there to answer technical questions if needed." I sat in the back corner of the boardroom that afternoon and watched Bryce present my entire strategy as his own. Slide by slide, he stumbled through my work, mispronouncing vendor names I'd been working with for years. When he reached the financial projections, the part I'd stayed up 3 nights perfecting, he flashed his winning smile. "And this is where my background in international markets really came into play," he said confidently. "I identified cost-saving approaches our team hadn't considered. Our team, my work, my strategy, my future." The board applauded. Robert beamed with pride. I said nothing. That night, I made my first call to an industry contact. Not looking for a job, not yet, just gathering information. Over the next 3 weeks, I meticulously organized my knowledge. I created transition documents that appeared comprehensive but conveniently omitted the unwritten rules and relationships that made everything work. I labeled files logically but not intuitively. I resolved immediate crises but left long-term solutions ambiguous. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply stopping the extraordinary efforts I'd been making for years to keep things running smoothly. When vendors called with concerns about Bryce's new aggressive approach, I soothed them professionally while making no promises. When colleagues asked about discrepancies in the new procedures, I provided technically correct but incomplete answers. I knew what was coming. Then came the morning Robert called me into his office. Bryce sat beside him, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Arya," Robert began, not quite meeting my eyes. "We're restructuring the operations department." I nodded, expression neutral. "The board feels we need to streamline leadership ahead of the Southern expansion. We're consolidating your position with Bryce's new role." I didn't react. I'd known this was coming since that first meeting. "Your contribution has been valuable," Robert continued mechanically, "but the company needs to evolve. We're prepared to offer a severance package, $22,000, 6 years of 60-hour weeks, thousands of solved problems, millions in saved costs. When would you like me to leave?" I asked quietly. Robert looked relieved at my calm response. "Today would be best. HR has prepared the paperwork." And so I found myself sitting across from Bryce, signing away my connection to the company I'd helped build, listening to him tell me I was nothing without them. What he didn't know, I'd already spoken with their 7 most important suppliers. I'd had coffee with their largest client's purchasing director. I'd reviewed every line of that bilateral non-compete clause with an attorney. I signed the papers, handed over my access card, and walked out with a cardboard box of personal items. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Taylor, my former assistant. "Everything's falling apart," she whispered. "The Westmont account is threatening to pull out." Westmont, their largest client, the one whose account I'd personally salvaged last year after a shipping disaster. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew. Bryce handled the renewal meeting himself. He told them they couldn't continue getting the 5% buffer on rush orders, said it wasn't in the contract. I closed my eyes. The buffer wasn't in the contract because it was an understanding I'd established through 3 years of relationship building. A handshake agreement that made Westmont feel valued while protecting our margins on regular orders. "What did they say?" Taylor's voice dropped even lower. "They walked out. Robert is furious. He's trying to figure out who can take over the account management to fix this." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. The first domino had fallen. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly everything would unravel. Within a week of my departure, Taylor called again. She sounded exhausted. "They've lost 3 more accounts," she said. "Nobody knows how to handle the Johnson brothers' specific shipping requirements, and Bryce told them their demands were unreasonable when they've been ordering the same way for 5 years. I stirred my tea, watching the steam rise. "That's unfortunate. Arya, it's chaos. The Southern expansion timeline is completely off track. Robert keeps asking where certain files are, but nobody can make sense of your organization system." I had organized everything meticulously, but in a way that made perfect sense to me, and only me. Not maliciously cryptic, just personalized. The way anyone would after 6 years in the same role. I'm sure they'll figure it out, I said calmly. Bryce has lots of fresh ideas. 2 weeks after my termination, I received a text from Milo, the IT director who'd been my ally through numerous system implementations. They're trying to hire Natasha from Rivera Supply Group to replace you, offering her double your salary. Natasha, a talented operations specialist who had worked for one of our main competitors for the past decade. Exactly the type of person who could potentially decode my systems and save them. I didn't respond to Milo's text. Instead, I called my lawyer. The next morning, Rivera Supply Group's legal team sent a formal cease and desist letter to Robert, citing the bilateral non-compete clause in my termination agreement. Anyone who had worked for a direct competitor in a similar role couldn't be hired for 18 months after my departure. Their own policy, their own protection measure, their own undoing. They tried again with Jensen from Eastern Logistics. Another letter, another dead end. 3 weeks after my departure, I was sitting in a small cafe when I overheard a familiar voice ordering coffee. I looked up to see Robert standing at the counter, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. Our eyes met as he turned with his drink. For a moment, he seemed about to walk away. Instead, he approached my table. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. I nodded, setting down my book. He looked thinner, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "How are you, Arya?" "I'm well," I replied simply. "And you?" He sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "Challenging times. Westmont took their business to advanced systems." I said nothing, waiting. "You built quite an intricate operation," he continued, studying me. "Nobody can quite piece together how everything worked so smoothly under your management." I sipped my tea. "I just did my job. I think we both know you did much more than that." He set down his coffee cup carefully. "The non-compete clause is causing some difficulties with finding your replacement." "That's standard industry practice," I said mildly. "Your legal team drafted it." Robert nodded slowly. "Arya, I'll be direct. We need you back. I can offer triple your previous salary, equity options, and a seat on the executive board." I studied his face, the face of a man who had given me my first real opportunity, then allowed his son to push me aside without a second thought. "I appreciate the offer," I said, echoing the words I'd used when signing my termination papers. "But I've already accepted a position elsewhere." His expression hardened slightly. "The non-compete clause works both ways. You can't work for a competitor either." I smiled. "I'm not working for a competitor, Robert. I've started my own consulting business. The non-compete prevents me from working in the same specific role for a direct competitor. It doesn't prevent me from advising companies in adjacent industries." He stared at me, understanding dawning on his face. "You planned this?" "No," I corrected him. "I prepared for all contingencies. There's a difference." I stood, gathering my belongings. "I wish you and Bryce the best with the Southern expansion. I'm sure his fresh ideas will turn things around." 4 weeks after my departure, I received another call from Taylor. "Robert and Bryce had a screaming match in the conference room," she whispered. "The quarterly numbers are disastrous. Bryce blamed the poorly documented processes you left behind." "What did Robert say?" I asked, genuinely curious. "He told Bryce that he gave him a golden opportunity and he's squandering it." Taylor paused. "Then Bryce said something about how he never wanted to work with the boring parts of the business anyway, and Robert nearly lost his mind." I couldn't help but smile as I watered my new office plants. The boring parts were what kept the entire operation profitable. "There's more," Taylor continued. "The board is concerned. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow." "That sounds stressful," I said neutrally. "How are you holding up?" Taylor sighed. "I'm updating my resume. Several others too." By week 6, the industry was buzzing with rumors about the company's instability. Their stock had dropped 17%. The Southern expansion had been temporarily paused for strategic reassessment. Corporate speak for, "We have no idea what we're doing." Meanwhile, my new consulting business was thriving. I'd carefully selected clients in adjacent industries who needed supply chain expertise without directly competing with my former employer. Companies who had heard about my work through industry channels and were eager for my insights. I was making twice my previous salary working half the hours. One evening, I was leaving a dinner meeting with a potential client when I spotted Bryce sitting alone at the restaurant bar. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled. I could have walked past unnoticed. Instead, I took the empty seat beside him. He looked up, recognition slowly dawning in his bloodshot eyes. Arya. Arya. Hello, Bryce, I said calmly. Long day? He gave a bitter laugh. You could say that. He gestured to the bartender for another drink. You here to gloat? Just finished a business dinner, I replied. How's the southern expansion going? His jaw tightened. You know exactly how it's going. The entire thing's on hold. The board is breathing down my neck. Dad barely speaks to me, except to point out everything I'm doing wrong. That sounds difficult, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I knew what it was like to disappoint Robert. Bryce studied me, anger and confusion warring in his expression. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching us crash and burn without you. I'm not enjoying anyone's hardship, I said truthfully, but I am enjoying building something new on my own terms. The bartender brought his drink. Bryce stared into it as if it might contain answers. You know what the worst part is? He said quietly. Dad keeps saying he never should have let you go. That I convinced him to make the biggest mistake of his career. I absorbed this information silently. Did you sabotage us? He asked suddenly, looking up. Leave traps in the systems or turn clients against us? I met his gaze steadily. No, Bryce. I didn't have to. He looked confused. Then how? I simply stopped being the exceptional employee who went above and beyond to make everything work perfectly, I explained. I stopped solving problems before they became crises. I stopped maintaining relationships that weren't in my job description. I stopped making you all look good. His face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. No single employee could have that much impact. Then I guess you have nothing to worry about, I replied, standing. Good luck with the board meeting tomorrow. I left him sitting there, drink untouched, staring after me. 8 weeks after my termination, Milo texted me a link to a business news article. The headline sent a jolt through me. Breaking. Robert Kane steps down as CEO amid company restructuring. I clicked the link, scanning the article. Robert was taking early retirement after 32 years. The board had appointed an interim CEO, not Bryce, while they searched for a permanent replacement. The southern expansion had been officially canceled. The company was downsizing its headquarters operations. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Arya Bennett speaking. I answered professionally. Miss Bennett, this is Patricia Winters, board chair at your former employer. Her voice was clipped, authoritative. I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow, if possible. I paused, genuinely surprised. May I ask what this is regarding? I think you know exactly what it's regarding, she replied. The board has some questions about operational procedures that only you seem able to answer. I considered my response carefully. I'm available tomorrow at noon. There's a quiet restaurant called Eloise near my office. I'll be there, Patricia said, then added, and Miss Bennett, come prepared to discuss terms for your return. After we hung up, I sat motionless in my office chair, staring out at the city skyline. This was an unexpected development. I hadn't planned for this possibility. Would I consider returning? Under what conditions? Could I trust them again? My phone buzzed with another text from Milo. You won't believe this. Bryce just got escorted out by security. Complete meltdown in the executive suite. Threw a stapler at the interim CEO. I set down my phone, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. This wasn't what I had anticipated when I signed those termination papers 2 months ago. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Patricia, professional but not overly formal. I wanted to project confidence, not desperation. I had options now. The power dynamic had shifted. As I gathered my notes, my phone rang again. Robert's personal number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, Robert. His voice sounded older, defeated. Arya, I heard Patricia reached out to you. She did. A long pause. Before you meet with her, I wanted to apologize. I made a terrible mistake listening to Bryce over my own judgment. I knew your value to the company. I chose family loyalty over business sense. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. The board doesn't know I'm calling, he continued. They're going to offer you my position, interim at first, then permanent, if you can turn things around. I nearly dropped the phone. CEO? That had never been my ambition or my expectation. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He sighed heavily. Because you deserve to know how much damage my poor decision caused. The company, the employees, my relationship with my son, and most importantly, the disrespect it showed to you and your contributions. I sat down, processing this revelation. And Bryce? He's taking some time to reevaluate his career path, away from the company. I glanced at my watch. I should go. My meeting with Patricia is in 30 minutes. Arya, Robert said quickly, one more thing. Whatever they offer you, ask for more. You've earned it. As I hung up and gathered my things to leave, I realized that the outcome of this situation was entirely in my hands. I could return triumphantly as CEO. I could negotiate any terms I wanted. I could even watch the company continue to struggle without me. For the first time in my professional career, I had complete control. The question was, what did I actually want? The restaurant was quieter than usual for a weekday lunch. Patricia Winters sat at a corner table, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a dark blue suit that radiated authority. She stood as I approached, extending her hand. Miss Bennett, thank you for meeting me. We exchanged pleasantries as we settled in, ordering sparkling water and declining menus for the moment. Business first. Patricia wasted no time. I'll be direct. The company is in trouble, and the board believes you're the solution. I nodded, saying nothing. In the 8 weeks since your departure, we've lost 17% of our market value. 4 major clients have terminated their contracts. The southern expansion is dead, costing us millions in preparation expenses with nothing to show for it. She took a sip of water, studying me carefully. What's most concerning is that no one seems able to replicate your operational systems. It's as if you built a machine that only you know how to operate. I placed my hands flat on the table. I built efficient systems based on my understanding of the business. Nothing was deliberately obscured. And yet, Patricia said with the hint of a smile, here we are. She opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. Our offer. CEO position. Starting immediately. 3-year contract with guaranteed renewal options. Salary at 3 times your previous compensation, plus performance bonuses and equity. I glanced at the numbers. They were impressive. The board is unanimous, Patricia continued. We need you back. I closed the document without signing. What about Robert? Early retirement, as the press release indicated. A generous package. His reputation remains intact. And Bryce? Patricia's expression cooled. Mr. Kane Jr. is no longer with the company. His behavior became untenable. I nodded slowly, processing this information. I'll need time to consider your offer. Of course, Patricia said, though I could see disappointment flash across her face. We'd hoped for an immediate decision, but we understand this is significant. There's something else you should know, I said carefully. I've established my own consulting business. I have clients who depend on me now. Patricia nodded. We anticipated that. The contract includes provisions for you to maintain your consulting practice in a limited capacity, provided there's no conflict of interest. They had thought of everything. The path back was being laid out before me, smooth and welcoming. I'll have an answer for you by tomorrow, I promised. As I left the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. Everyone's saying you're coming back as CEO. Tell me it's true. I smiled, but didn't respond. I needed to think. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony watching the sunset paint the city skyline in gold and pink. My laptop was open to Patricia's offer, the cursor blinking on the signature line of the PDF. All I had to do was sign, and I would return not just to my former position, but to run the entire company. Everything Bryce had taken from me would be returned tenfold. It was the perfect revenge story. And yet, I closed the laptop and called the one person whose opinion I truly valued. Grandma? It's Arya. I need your wisdom. My grandmother had built a successful business in the 1970s when women entrepreneurs faced even greater challenges than today. She'd sold it to retire comfortably, but still maintained the sharpest business mind I knew. I explained the situation, laying out all the facts without emotion. So, she said when I finished, they pushed you out, realized they made a terrible mistake, and now want you back as their savior. That's the simplified version, yes, she chuckled. And you're considering it because, I hesitated, examining my true motivations. Because it validates everything I believed about my value to the company. Because it proves I was right. She murmured. And if you go back, what happens next? I fix their problems. I rebuild what's broken. I lead the company forward. For them, she noted quietly, you'd be using your exceptional talents to save the very people who discarded you. I hadn't thought about it quite that way. Arya, let me ask you something. In these past 8 weeks with your consulting business, have you been happy? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I have. I set my own hours. I choose my clients. The work is challenging, but on my terms. And if you take this CEO position, I sighed, seeing the truth. 60-hour weeks minimum, board politics, cleaning up messes I didn't create. With a very impressive title and salary, Grandma added. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. You know, when I sold my company, I was offered a position on their executive team, triple my previous salary. You never told me that, I said, surprised. Because it wasn't important, I declined. Do you know why? Why? Because I realized something. Once you've experienced the freedom of building something that's truly yours, going back to building someone else's dream feels like a step backward, no matter how prestigious the title or how large the paycheck. The truth of her words resonated deeply. I'd been so focused on vindication, on proving my worth to people who had undervalued me, that I hadn't considered what I truly wanted. Thanks, Grandma, I said softly. I think I know what I need to do. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Patricia and 2 keyboard members. They agreed immediately, assuming I was ready to accept their offer. We met in a conference room at their headquarters, the first time I'd been back since my termination. Walking through the lobby felt strange, like returning to a childhood home now occupied by strangers. Familiar faces lit up at the sight of me, whispers following in my wake. Patricia greeted me warmly, gesturing to the contract on the table. We're thrilled you're joining us again, Arya. The team is already excited about your return. I sat down, placing my own folder on the table. Before we proceed, I'd like to present an alternative proposal. Confusion flickered across their faces. Alternative? Asked Edward, the longest-serving board member. Yes. I opened my folder. Instead of returning as CEO, I'm proposing a 6-month consulting agreement. My firm will help stabilize your operations, train your team on the systems I developed, and assist in finding a suitable permanent CEO. Patricia's smile faded. But we want you as our CEO. I understand that, I said calmly, but that's not what I want. I slid my proposal across the table. My consulting fee is substantial, but far less than you'd pay me as CEO over 3 years. At the end of 6 months, you'll have a stable company and a team that fully understands how to maintain it. Edward studied the document, frowning. This isn't what we discussed, Miss Bennett. No, I agreed. It's what I'm offering. Patricia leaned forward. Arya, perhaps you don't understand the opportunity here. CEO positions at companies our size rarely become available, especially for someone at your stage of career. I understand perfectly, I replied, but I've built something of my own now, something that brings me satisfaction and allows me to use my skills on my terms. The 3 of them exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this response. We need to discuss this privately, Patricia said finally. Of course. I stood. I'll wait outside. In the hallway, I ran into Taylor, who hugged me impulsively. You're back! Everyone's so excited. Not exactly, I said, explaining my proposal. Her expression fell slightly. So you wouldn't be my boss again? I'd be working with the company, but not rejoining it. I clarified. And Taylor, if they accept my proposal, I'd like you to be my point person here. You'd essentially become the expert on all the systems I built. Her eyes widened. Really? You'd trust me with that? Absolutely. You've always understood the operational flow better than anyone else. 20 minutes later, Patricia called me back into the conference room. Their expressions were somber but resigned. We've discussed your proposal, she said. While it's not what we hoped for, we recognize it may be our best option given the circumstances. We have some amendments we'd like to discuss. Over the next hour, we negotiated terms. My consulting fee, the scope of work, the timeline. By afternoon, we had an agreement. I would start the following Monday. As we concluded the meeting, Edward asked the question I'd been waiting for. May I ask, Miss Bennett, why not come back as CEO? Is it the compensation? The terms? What would it take? I smiled, finally ready to reveal what they had never understood. Mr. Holland, when I was terminated, Bryce told me I was nothing without this company, that I should be grateful for the opportunity. At the time, I signed the papers quietly because I knew something he didn't. I closed my folder, meeting his gaze directly. I knew I wasn't nothing without the company. I knew the company was nothing without me. Patricia inhaled sharply. You see, my revenge was never about destroying the company or even getting Bryce fired. It wasn't about forcing Robert into early retirement or watching the stock price fall. I stood, gathering my things. My revenge was discovering my true value in a world that tried to convince me I had none. It was building something of my own while watching you all realize exactly what you had discarded. Edward's expression shifted from confusion to grudging respect. The greatest revenge wasn't coming back triumphantly as CEO. It wasn't even refusing your offer. It's knowing that after everything, you need me far more than I need you. And now, you're going to pay premium rates for expertise you once took for granted. I extended my hand to Patricia. I look forward to working with you all again, as your consultant, not your employee. As I walked out of the building that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't coming back as their savior. I was helping them as an equal, on my terms, while continuing to build my own business. 6 months later, the company was stable again. Their stock had recovered. The operational systems were fully documented and functioning smoothly under Taylor's capable management. I had helped them find a talented CEO who valued the team properly. My consulting business had grown to require 3 additional employees. I worked reasonable hours on projects that excited me. I turned down clients who reminded me too much of Bryce. The final day of my consulting contract, Robert invited me to coffee. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him. The burden of leadership lifted from his shoulders. "You saved the company," he said simply. "Thank you." I smiled. "The company saved itself, with some guidance." He nodded, understanding the distinction. "And Bryce, how is he?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Humbled. Working for a small startup where his name carries no weight. Learning the business from the ground up." Robert's smile held both sadness and hope. "It's what he needed all along." We talked for a while longer, not as former boss and employee, but as 2 professionals with mutual respect. As I was leaving, Robert said, "You know, when you turned down the CEO position, the board thought you were making a terrible mistake. And now? Now they realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be, as am I." I nodded, knowing he was right. Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking everything your enemies have. Sometimes it's showing them exactly what they lost, and then walking away to build something better. Something that's truly yours. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside despite your hard work and talent, I hope this story reminds you that your value doesn't depend on others' recognition. The most powerful thing you can do is believe in yourself when no one else does. Like this video if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who doubted you, comment with your own story of standing up for yourself, and subscribe for more tales of finding power in unexpected places. Remember, your revenge doesn't have to destroy others. It can simply be building yourself up so high they can't help but look up at you.